Hello everyone, it's really good to see you here. So today we are going to solve a GFG problem which is find maximum equal sum of three stacks. So we have given three stacks and we have to find the maximum equal sum of three stacks. So what we have given is that let's suppose three stack S1, S2 and S3 of positive number. The task is to find the possible equal maximum sum of the stack with the removal of top element allowed. So we can only remove top element of the stack and we have to find what is the maximum equal sum we can get by doing only removal of top element of the stack. And stack is represented as the array and the first index of the array represent the top element. So this point has to be noted that the first index of the array represent the top element of the stack. So now let's see how we can approach this problem. So let's suppose we have given x, y and z three stacks. So what we do, we just firstly make the sum of the array x, y and z. So C1 representing the sum of x, C2 representing sum of y and C3 representing sum of z. So what we do, if C1 equals to C2 and C2 equals to C3, then we return C1, C2 or C3, we can return anything as our answer because that is the required answer. But if this is not the case, let's suppose C1 is greater than C2 and C3, then what we do, we just pop out the first element. And the top element is basically the first element of the array, which is already given in the question. So we just subtract C1, we just subtract x of I from the C1 and we just make our I plus plus. And if this is not the case, that is C2 is greater than C1 and C3, then we subtract yj from C2 and then we increment the jth counter. And the only left part which we have to compare is that if C3 is greater than C1 and C2, then we just subtract z of k from our C3 and then we increment our k counter. So let's see with this example. So firstly, C1 is 9, C2 is 7 and C3 is 5. So as you can see that C1 is greater than C2 and C3. So we just subtract the first element. So the first element is 4. That is for I equals to 0. The element is 4. So we subtract 4 from here. So we get 5. So in our first iteration, our C1, C2 and C3 values like this 5, 7, 5. And again, in the next iteration, now our C1 is this one, C2 is this one, C3 is this one. So C2 is greater than C1 and C3. That's why what we do, we just subtract this particular element from our C2. So now C2 becomes 6. Rest each and every element remains same. And again, we can see that C2 is now also greater than C1 and C3. So we just so our pointer is now pointing to this element. So we decrement this element, which is basically the top element of the stack, y. So we decrement it from C2. So we get 5, 5 and 5. And in this condition, we got our required answer, that is C1 is equal to C2 and C2 is equal to C3. So we just return any of them and this is our required answer. And there will be chances that no one C1 like after iterating the whole stack, no C1 and C2 and C3 are equal. So in that case, we have to actually return 0 as our answer. So now let's dive into the coding part. So firstly, three pointers I, J and K are for assessing all the three array representing the stack. So what we do, C1 is basically containing the sum of all the elements of our uh, S1 stack. Similarly, C2 is the sum of all elements of S2 stack and C3 is the sum of all elements of S3 stack. Now what we do, we just run a while loop till the point I is less than n1, j is less than n2 and k is less than n3, where n1, n2 and n3 are the size of the vector s1, s2 and s3 respectively. So after that, we have to check these four conditions. So first one is that if C1 is equal to C2 and C2 is equal to C3, then we return C1. But if this is not the case, then we check that if C1 is greater than C2 and C3, then we have to minus or we have to decrement C1 by S1I and we have to increment the ith counter, and this goes same for rest all the left cases. And at the end, if no answer is returned, then we simply return 0, because in that possible case there is no such sum which is equal for both, for all the three given stack. So let's try to submit this up. So this is the approach to solve the problem, find maximum equal sum of three stacks. And if you want to access the code, then you can check the GitHub link given in the description. And this is it for this video. Thanks for watching.